Good
What's
morning.
all this security you got on this thing, man? What the hell?
I don't know. I've tried to
feel
remove
left
some
out.
of it. What's that?
Huh? I said I feel left out. I can't contact my classmates. You know, what's going on? Do you know anything about that?
No. What in Moodle you can't contact people?
Yeah. Well, the only reason I'm asking is not to sound like I'm coming off like it bothers me in some way, but like I'm having issues, and I feel like my chemistry research might have got me blacklisted in some kind of way. I'm actually reading that book called Cyclotrons, the use in chemistry, metallurgy, and biology.
Oh,
Yeah,
all right.
cyclotrons, those cyclotron machines where you can increase the, oh, hold on, my aunt's calling me. I got to decline.
All right.
Morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Tired but good.
Good.
Work's been overwhelming.
Yeah. Are they down workers like everywhere else? Everybody is,
Yeah,
hurting for workers, and
they had one nurse no call, no show, one nurse quit on the spot, and another one sent in a text, I quit.
wow.
And I was training 2 girls and they did no call, no shows.
Wow.
Oh, I work on a very difficult unit.
Yeah.
I work with Alzheimer's, dementia, schizophrenia.
Oh,
They come to me when they need their meds adjusted.
right.
So like last night I got kicked in the stomach.
Oh,
So
jeez.
yeah, I ended up staying until 3 a.m. again because they only had one person on the floor.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it was a difficult night. Then I came home and read my book for an hour and then went to sleep.
Wow. I don't know. That's a tough road. I know my aunt did work at a facility where it was all people with traumatic brain injuries. And it's
Yeah.
just, I mean, it's so tough. It's so unpredictable. And, you don't know, like you said, you can't blame the patients for what they're going through, but it's so tough to keep workers there and to, get them to understand it.
The reason I stay is because I know it's the illness. It's not them. If it was them, it'd be different, but it's the illness. They can't control it.
Right.
So that's how the mind is just, I'm serious. There's a lot of things about the mind nobody knows.
Oh yeah. No, it's amazing. The brain is amazing. And it's amazing to think that, scientists don't fully understand a lot of what's going on there.
Yep. It's fascinating. It's just tiring sometimes.
Sure. Absolutely.
So I was supposed to have yesterday off. It was my day off and they called me in.
And you got stuck there till 3.
Yeah. And I'm there. Tonight will be my 5th day on, and I still have 2 more days to go before my Saturday, Sunday off.
Wow.
Somebody's got to do it.
Right. You said you can't just leave them there.
No, you can't, can't leave it short, can't leave it understaffed because then the patients get neglected. So
Sure.
I try doing my homework when I get home from work and read my book at work when I get a chance.
Right.
I downloaded the ebook, so if I'm sitting with somebody, I'll just sit and read the ebook and highlight that way.
Oh, good. That's good.
So, because I won't bring my book to work because I had a patient steal my book one day and I couldn't find it, and they found it tucked under the mattress. So now I use my ebook.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, they'll steal anything, so you got to be careful.
Yeah. Just to do it.
We had a patient pickpocket a guy, one of our orderlies, and the guy ended up taking his wallet and his keys.
Wow.
He's like, "Where's my keys?" Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah.
Well, so in looking over, this course, I'm planning on going through histology, like tissues today. Probably doing the skin on Friday and going over lab stuff on Friday. There's kind of just a lab handout. And then I'll make the test available on Friday. And you'll have till the following Thursday at midnight to do it again. So you'll have like a whole week to do it at some point in there. So that's my plan going forward.
Now that's the test. There's no quizzes. I didn't see any.
Yeah, there was a quiz on cell biology, right? That was due last night at midnight, I think. And then there's one, so let me share my screen. There's one on tissues.
Was there
and-
one due last night?
It was the cell biology one, which I think you already did, right? I think you did that last week, probably.
I don't know. I'm trying to keep track of both sites. Sometimes it gets a little confusing. I keep trying to check it, but the last couple nights it's been so crazy.
So cell biology, I actually moved it to today because a couple people didn't do it.
Okay.
And then the tissues
do it
quiz
today
is due
then.
next week.
I don't think I did it. I
Okay.
don't remember it.
Let me stop sharing. I can look if I'm not sharing the screen. Right.
I don't
You can't see
remember.
you can't see my screen, right?
No, I see
Okay.
you. That's it.
Okay. So I will go in and check your grade and see, because I can see if you did it.
Oh wait,
There's-
is that the one I emailed you on?
I think so,
Okay, so then I think I did it.
but I can, I'll check your grade just to make sure. I just didn't want to check it in front of,
It's just because of the two different sites. Sometimes I get confused. So I
Right.
have to keep trying to check them both to make sure I'm not missing anything because it's
Right.
not listed on one.
participants. I don't know where everybody, there we go. So let me just check that out. There we go. Read the book.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear
Yeah.
you.
All right. Yeah, I tried to ignore my aunt's call and it hung up everything. So sorry about that.
All right.
Yeah, but I was reading about uranium-238 and how you can get cesium, what is it? 132 out of it? Is that right?
I don't know.
Anyways, you can get different isotopes by increasing the velocity in a cyclotron. And
Okay.
it's pretty amazing. Like that's kind of the stuff they do at CERN and all that
Right.
good stuff. Yeah. I figured you'd know about that a little about that, so I figured I'd tell you about this book.
I don't know much of chemistry. I mean, I know some basic chemistry, but not a whole lot.
I
Um,
see.
So here we go. I'm back now. So Kristen, yes, you did do the quiz, so that's good.
Okay.
So we were just talking about what's due. The quiz for cell biology, I actually switched to today. It was supposed to be due yesterday. I inadvertently made it due Monday. I messed up on the calendar. So I gave you guys an extra day on it for anybody that hasn't done it. You have till midnight tonight to finish it. The next quiz is the quiz on tissues and skin, which we'll start going over today. That's due next Tuesday at midnight. I figured today we're going to get through tissues, and I think we'll probably do skin on Friday, along with going over some of the lab work on Friday. And I will make the exam available on Friday. So the exam is on the cell biology chapter and the tissues and the skin. So I'll make that available on Friday, and you'll have till the following Thursday at midnight. So you'll have almost a week to do that. And that'll be in Moodle. That'll be just like the first exam was. So that's just kind of an overview of where we're going. So let me go ahead and share my screen.
And so what was due last night? I apologize. I guess I missed that.
That's okay.
part.
It was the cell biology quiz. So here is here are your assignments in mastering A&P. Right. This quiz was supposed to be due last night, and I inadvertently made it due Monday. So I changed it to today.
Okay, so the
Right, and
tissue
then
was,
Next
and then
Tuesday will
I-
be the tissues
Mhm.
quiz, and then next Friday are going to be due the homeworks for cells and tissues. That's the same day that the test will be due, right? So I would recommend doing these before the test, even though they're not due until then.
Right.
They'll give you practice before the test.
So just the cell biology was due today. Did you get everything for me? I didn't return it in because I read more and I think I said it right. So,
I can check. Let me stop sharing and then I can check without showing everybody. Everybody else is great. So Josh, are you related to Galicios from Connecticut?
I don't
You
know
don't know?
because my grandfather they grew up in Chicago, so
Oh.
that's what I know. And they came from Italy, my
Right.
grandfather. Yeah.
No, I know a
so-
Galicio family here in Connecticut, but I don't think I don't think they have connections to Chicago.
Yeah, I think because I have a smaller, I don't know the extent of his family's side. That's the thing.
Gotcha.
How many people? My aunt and mom didn't really talk about that,
Gotcha.
but I'll ask now that you brought that up. Like, do we have anybody in Connecticut? Actually, I'll
Right.
text
I
her
know
right
a whole I mean, I know a guy who's, let's see, he's got to be about 75 and he's got like 5 brothers and a sister. But I think they all live in Connecticut. I think they all live around here, but not that that's far from Mass.
Connecticut. I'm just here for school, and I took advantage of the VA system a couple years ago.
Okay.
'Cause I went through that whole, I broke my leg and it became a situation. So I was like, all right.
Yeah.
Anyways, do we have any Connecticut area around age 75? We'll find out.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
You did the quiz, Josh. I just looked at your grade, so you did the quiz. That's all he did.
All right.
So,
Did I get a good grade?
yeah.
Sweet. That's cool.
And so one of the things that I'll do today or tonight is transfer those grades onto Moodle. I keep forgetting to do that. They don't automatically go into Moodle, so I have to manually input them. That way you guys can see how you did, right? I mean, you can see, you can just log into Mastering and see, but at least this way it'll give you an idea of how you're doing in the class. It'll weight the homework and the quizzes and the tests that you've taken and kind of give you an idea of what your average is. All right, so here's our book. Chapter 4 is the tissue level of organization, right? So we talked about cells, right? We talked about all these different parts inside the cell, the little organelles. When you get multiple cells working together for a similar purpose or the same purpose, that's considered a tissue. And then multiple tissues working together is an organ, right? So an organ like the stomach is going to have multiple tissues in it. And so we have to study tissues in order to understand a little bit better how these organs work. And that study is called histology. So if I took any tissue from the human body, from anywhere, and I had to categorize it, there are these 4 categories. There are these 4 big groups. There's epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. So any tissue that I take is going to fall into one of those 4 categories. Now, there are properties of each category that we'll talk about, and there are like subcategories within each of those 4. So we'll start off with epithelial, right? That's kind of the first one that we'll start with. Epithelial tissue is usually a barrier or a covering. It's usually lining or covering the outside of an organ or the inside of an organ, right? It's usually some sort of a lining. It also is what makes up most of our glands, right? So our endocrine glands, which we saw, things like sweat glands, are made up of epithelial tissues. These cells are bound closely together, okay? Because they perform the function of a barrier or a lining, the cells are right up next to each other, right? They're not going to let things get through them. And they're always, because they're always either the outermost layer or the innermost layer, one layer of these cells or one edge of these cells is always attached and the other edge is always free, right? And we'll see this in a drawing in a minute. The free edge is called the apical surface, right? The edge that's not attached is called the apical surface. The edge that's attached is attached to what's called the basement membrane. Okay, so epithelial tissue, the cells are always close together, right next to each other. One edge is free, called the apical edge. The other edge is attached to a basement membrane. They typically, all these epithelial tissues that we'll talk about do not have blood vessels. There's no room for them. The cells are right up against each other. There's no blood vessels there. And you continually replace or regenerate these cells constantly throughout your life. So, for example, the outer layers of your skin are epithelial tissue. We're constantly making new skin cells and shedding old ones as every day goes on. So again, they are coverings, covering of external and internal body surfaces. So your skin, they line your internal passageway, like your digestive system, your urinary system, your respiratory tract, your reproductive tracts, right? And they form barriers. So they're allowing for certain things to get through while preventing other things from passing through. They line cavities, they line passageways. So they line the cavities around the lungs, the cavities around the heart, right? And they serve as a barrier. They're there to try to prevent microorganisms from getting across them. Right? So functions, they provide protection. They control what gets into or out of a tissue a lot of times, right? What gets across that layer. They do provide sensation. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And some of them produce specialized secretions. These are the glands, right? There are some epithelial tissues that make up glands that secrete things. So they secrete hormones or they secrete other products. Okay, so they have all these cell-to-cell junctions. Remember, these cells have to be right next to each other because they're forming a barrier, because they're trying not to let things across. There are these different types of cell junctions. There are tight junctions, gap junctions, spot desmosomes, and hemidesmosomes. And here are examples of all of those, right? So this is just a stylized epithelial cell. You can see that the tissue has one free edge. This top edge here is the apical edge. It's not attached to anything. The bottom is attached to a basement membrane. And the cells are stuck to each other through these different types of junctions. Now, when you're naming epithelial tissue, it's always named with two words. Always, always, always named with two words. The first word is going to be either simple or stratified. And that first word tells you the number of layers of cells that you have. So if it's simple epithelial tissue, it only has one layer of cells. If it's stratified epithelial tissue, it has multiple layers. So it can be 2, it can be 20, doesn't matter. It's stratified, it's more than one. The second word tells you the shape of the cells. Okay, and the three shapes that you have are squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. Well, columnar, that's pretty easy, right? Those are column shaped. Cuboidal are cube shaped. Squamous, a lot of times they're described as fried egg shaped or like the scales of a fish. They are these elongated cells. So you can see a squamous cell right here in the upper left, right? They're kind of these long flattened out cells. And in all these pictures, you can see the shape of the cell, and then the darker purple is the nucleus inside the cell. So just by going with these rules, that gives you 6 types of epithelial tissue, right? That gives you simple squamous, stratified squamous, simple cuboidal, stratified cuboidal, simple columnar, stratified columnar, just by following those rules. One thing to keep in mind is when you are talking about stratified epithelial tissue and you're naming it, the shape is, the tissue is named for the shape of the apical cells, right? So the cells that are the furthest out. So the cells at the bottom are attached to a basement membrane. The cells at the top are the apical layer. They're not attached to anything. It's the shape of these cells that give that tissue its name. So if you just quickly looked at this, right, most of these layers look like they're cuboidal cells. So you might think, well, this is stratified cuboidal. There's all these cuboidal cells. But because the top layer are squamous shaped, it's stratified squamous. Okay, the same thing over here with stratified columnar. there's a couple layers of cuboidal cell, what look like cuboidal cells, but it's stratified columnar because those apical cells, the cells all the way at the edge, have the shape of columns. Right? So there's simple epithelium and stratified, right? Squamous, cuboidal, columnar. So when we start talking about where these things are, right, you have to think about what they do, what they're good at. One of the things I said with epithelial tissue is that it makes up your skin. Now, what's the purpose of your skin? What's it there for? What's it do for us? Protection, right? It keeps things from getting in, keeps things from infecting us. So would it make more sense for our skin to be stratified or simple?
Stratified.
Stratified, right? So
Yep.
more layers, that's going to offer more protection. So all of these examples on this particular slide are simple, meaning that they're all just one cell layer thick. That's not great at allowing for a barrier, right? Things that don't allow for any penetration. So these simple epithelial tissues usually allow for something to get across them, right? It's just one layer of cells. And so it's a little bit easier for a substance to get across one layer of cells than say 20 layers of cells. So simple squamous is usually, it allows for diffusion, right? It allows for things to get across that one layer of cells. And one of the best examples of it is in the air sac of your lungs. So in the air sacs of your lungs, what substance do you think has to get across that one cell layer? What do we breathe?
Air.
Yeah.
Oxygen.
What molecule in the air do we want? What is it?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. Good.
Yeah.
So simple squamous lines the inside of our lungs, and it's only that one cell layer thick because it allows for oxygen to get across that layer. Okay. Simple cuboidal. Anytime you see cuboidal, usually it's secreting something. Usually that shape of cell is secreting something. These are found lining most of your kidney tubules. So again, you want things to get into or out of the kidney tubules. Your kidneys are filtering your blood. They're filtering out excess water, excess salt. You want those substances to get across that layer. Simple columnar is usually found where you absorb things. And this is common lining your intestines. Whatever you eat, right, whatever nutrients are in the foods that you eat, they have to get across this layer in your intestines to get into your bloodstream, right? So the simple epithelial tissues are usually allowing for something to get across them, right? And here are some examples of what they look like and where they are in the body. The stratified epithelial tissues, right, they provide a little more of protection. There are more layers. So stratified squamous is almost always for protection. Common example is the skin, right? Your skin is made up of multiple layers. It's there to protect you. It's there to keep things out. Stratified cuboidal is pretty rare, but it is in the ducts of sweat glands and mammary glands. And move through everything. And stratified columnar is also rare. It's found in things like lining your urethra. It's found making up your epiglottis. And as I said before, only the cells that are right at the edge are columnar. The ones underneath those, right, can be different shaped, but it's named because the cells that are at the apical layer are columnar. So we have 6 types of epithelial tissue right there. Right, and here are pictures of the stratified ones and the examples of where they are. There's 2 more types of epithelial that kind of don't fit into that grouping, right, into those six categories. There is something called pseudostratified columnar epithelium. So the prefix pseudo, if I put pseudo in front of something, what does it usually mean? What do you think pseudo means?
Do this one.
Like, what's pseudoscience? What's that implying?
Psychology.
Right. So no, pseudoscience. So pseudo means fake, right? So when
Once
people
you
talk
read
about
chemistry,
pseudoscience,
I'm sorry.
when people talk about pseudoscience, they talk about things that are not real science. So
Mhm.
pseudo always means false or fake. So if it's pseudo stratified, it's false stratified. What that means is that it looks like it's stratified, it looks like it's multiple layers, but it's really only one layer. Okay, and I'm going to show you a picture of this in a second. So when you're looking at these other epithelial tissues that we've named, the nuclei all line up in a nice row. Well, in pseudostratified columnar epithelium, the nuclei are at all different levels. So at first glance, it looks like it's multiple rows of tissue or of cells, but they're actually all reaching the basement layer. They're all reaching that bottom surface. Typically, pseudostratified columnar epithelium have cilia. So on their free edge, on the apical edge, they have these little hair-like projections, right? And they're kind of like eyelashes, and they move, and what they do is they push things past them, right? Because remember, these cells are attached at the bottom, so they've got these little eyelashes that move, and they push things past them. A good example of where these are is lining your trachea, lining your windpipe, right? And so the cilia are actually trying to push debris past them, past these cells, so that you're not getting those pieces of debris down into your lungs. You're trying to push them back up so that you get rid of them, cough them out. Okay. The other type of epithelial, and then I'll show you pictures of both of these. The other type of epithelial is transitional. Okay, this is the only one that you can name with just one word, and it's transitional epithelium. It is stratified, it is more than one layer, but its appearance changes as it stretches. So this is found in places that change size throughout the day. For example, your bladder, right? Your urinary bladder is constantly getting bigger and smaller throughout the day. And it's lined with these epithelial cells that can accommodate that. They can stretch, they can get bigger, and then they can get smaller. So they don't have a definite shape, right? You can't say they look squamous or they look cuboidal. It depends on how full your bladder is. And so they're called transitional epithelial tissues. Right. I thought I had pictures of those, but I don't. I'm sorry. So we have 8 types of epithelial tissue. We have simple squamous, stratified squamous, simple cuboidal, stratified cuboidal, simple columnar, stratified columnar, pseudostratified columnar, and transitional. We have 8 of them. Then we get to connective tissue, right? Connective tissue is probably the most diverse type of tissue. There are the most different types in there, subtypes in there. It's called connective tissue because it usually connects other tissues together. Often you find connective tissue right under epithelial tissue. So the epithelial tissue, one end is connected, then underneath that you'll find connective tissue. They have very specialized cells that carry out different functions depending on what the tissue is. There's a lot of stuff outside the cell. So it's very different from epithelial cells in that in epithelial cells, we saw the cells were right up against each other, right? This is a barrier or a lining. Connective tissue, the cells are pretty far apart. And there's a lot of components in between the cells. Those components are called extracellular, right? They're outside the cell. So there's a lot of protein fibers outside the cell. And depending on how many fibers there are and how tightly packed they are, that can give a different texture to the tissue, right? And that kind of characterizes the tissue. So in all connective tissues, the cells are surrounded by what's called a matrix, right? The cells are pretty far apart and there's a lot of extracellular material between them. There are fibers between them. There are other substances between them. For example, bone is a connective tissue. So you have calcium hydroxyapatite, right? You have this hard calcium deposit in between the bone cells. Cartilage is a connective tissue. Blood is a connective tissue. So all these different tissues have very different matrices, right? The materials between the cells are very different. Connective tissues are never exposed to the outside environment. So when you're looking at these under a microscope, you'll never see one free edge like you did with epithelial tissues, right? You always saw epithelial always had one free edge. You'll never see that with connective tissues. They're never exposed to the outside environment. Many of them are highly vascular, which is really different than epithelial, right? I said epithelial tissues typically don't have blood vessels. Connective tissues have usually a good amount of blood in them. And a lot of them contain sensory receptors, right? You have a type of connective tissue underneath your skin that contains all kinds of sensory receptors. In your tendons and your ligaments, you have stretch receptors that can sense how much your different joints have stretched. So as far as functions go, most of them are there for support and protection. So things like tendons, ligaments are there for support and protection. Some transport materials. Blood is a big way to transport materials throughout your body. Some are storage of energy reserves. Adipose tissue is a connective tissue. So that's what fat is, right? Fat is storage of energy reserves. And some defend the body. The white blood cells, right, are also part of blood, which is a connective tissue, and those defend your body. So when we look at connective tissues, we can break it down further into some that are connective tissue proper, that follow a bunch of rules. And then these other two types that don't necessarily follow the rules. Those are fluid connective tissues and supporting connective tissue, right? So here they're showing you that we have all connective tissues, and then within all connective tissues, there are these three groupings. There's connective tissue proper, there's fluid connective tissues, and there are supporting connective tissues. Connective tissue proper tends to be either loose or dense, and we'll talk about that. Fluid, things like blood and lymph. Supporting connective tissues, cartilage and bone are supporting connective tissues. So in connective tissue proper, the cells themselves are called fibroblasts or fibrocytes. Okay, and in this picture has got a lot going on, it looks like, right? But here's in purple, here's a fibrocyte. There's a fibroblast right here in purple. The name comes from the fact that those cells actually secrete the fibers that you see in the matrix surrounding the cells. So these cells, these fibrocytes and fibroblasts, are secreting all these string-like fibers, right? That's why their names are fibrocytes or fibroblasts. Those are really the only cells of the connective tissue. But in loose connective tissue, which this is, there's a lot of space, right? You've got one fibroblast here on the left, one on the right. That's it. And then you've got all these fibers, right? Collagen fibers, you've got reticular fibers, and then there's all this extra space. Well, if we look at what's in this space, there are things like fat cells, there are blood vessels, there are white blood cells. An antibody producing cell is a white blood cell. There are macrophages, which is another type of white blood cells. So there's lots of space for other cells to exist there. But really the connective tissue itself is really just the fibrocytes or the fibroblasts and the fibers that they secrete. It just happens to be that there's a lot of room for all these other cell types in there. So the fibroblasts are always present in connective tissue proper. Fibrocytes are just mature fibroblasts. They are the ones that actually produce the fibers. That's why they're called fibroblasts. They can produce those fibers. Right? And there are three basic types of fibers: collagen, elastic, and reticular. You don't need to know any differences between them. Right? Collagen tend to be the strongest ones. Elastic can stretch. Reticular are a little bit thinner. But you don't need to know much detail of any of those. Then what's between all of the cells and between the fibers is what's called ground substance. It's kind of this clear, syrupy, colorless, almost like a liquid, but thicker, more viscous, like honey. It slows the movement of pathogens. And within this ground substance, you can have things like macrophages, right, floating around trying to defend your body. That's the ground substance that's between these cells. So if you have a lot of fibers and they're packed really tightly together, you don't have a lot of ground substance. If the fibers are kind of far apart, then there's more of this ground substance between them. So within connective tissue proper, this is connective tissue where you have fibroblasts and fibrocytes. There are these three different types. And it's basically packaging material of the body. It's surrounding a lot of these organs and kind of insulating them, keeping them safe, keeping them from getting jostled around. You have loose connective tissue that's called areolar connective tissue. And that's basically this picture that I showed you is areolar connective tissue, where there's a lot of space between all these cells. Adipose connective tissue is considered a loose connective tissue proper. It stores lipids, right? And that's basically storage of energy, but it's also there for insulation and protection around your organs. So we have adipose pads around our kidneys. We have them right under our skin. We'll see when we talk about the skin, there's a layer of adipose right under our skin. And then there is loose connective tissue proper that's called reticular connective tissue. This forms the framework of soft organs. So things like your spleen, right? Your lungs, your lymph nodes, organs that are kind of soft and squishy have this reticular connective tissue that makes them up. Okay, and here are examples of all of these. So in this slide of areolar tissue, the fibrocytes are these dark purple things. And there's one here, there's one way over here. All of these pink strings are fibers that they secrete. And then some of these cells are macrophages, right? They're just white blood cells that are hanging out defending your body. Now, looking at this picture, I would expect you to know that that's areolar connective tissue. I would not expect you to be able to differentiate between a fibroblast and the macrophage. Okay. That you can't really tell too much from this particular picture. Adipose tissue, this is what adipose looks like under a microscope. These cells right here, these big white cells, are the actual fat cells. And that big white area is a vacuole that gets bigger and bigger and can take up more and more triglycerides. And, most cells are filled with cytoplasm. Talked about that in cell biology. With adipose tissue, the fats take up so much space that they push the cytoplasm to the side. The cytoplasm is this pink stuff, right? And you can see a nucleus, and a nucleus here, and a nucleus here. The nuclei are pushed to the corner, and the cytoplasm is pushed to the edge, right? And it's because the cell takes up all these triglycerides, pushes that cytoplasm out to the edges. So adipose tissue, you always see these big round circles. They're very round looking, very regular looking. They are the cells that contain the fat. And then reticular tissue, you can see a lot more fibers in it, right? It's not like areolar where there's a lot of space. There is space between the fibers, but it's kind of arranged in this more definite wavy pattern, right? It's not like the areolar tissue. So within connective tissue proper, those three types were loose. There's also dense connective tissue proper, which is much tougher and stronger, as the name suggests. There are a lot more fibers than loose connective tissue, and they're packed really tight together. So there's less room for ground substance. There's less room for that syrupy substance. They resist tension, so they're really strong. There's dense irregular and dense regular. And here are examples of both of them. So dense regular, all of these pink wavy lines, those are all fibers packed really tightly together. And these purple spots are the fibroblasts. So again, it's connective tissue proper. You still have these fibroblasts, and they're pretty far apart with a lot of material between them. This would be like what makes up your tendons and your ligaments. Dense connective tissue, regular connective tissue. Dense irregular connective tissue, the fibers are running in all different directions, right? So in regular connective tissue, these fibers are all running parallel to each other. Dense irregular, they're running in different directions. A good example of this is the dermis of the skin, which is the underneath layer of the skin. So we had under connective tissue proper, we had 5 different types, right? We had areolar, adipose, reticular, then we had dense regular, dense irregular. Then we get into some connective tissues that don't really follow the rules. Blood and lymph are 2 of those. A lot of times they're considered the same tissue, and we'll see why in future chapters. It's kind of, they're derived from the same thing. But these cells are in a fluid matrix with dissolved proteins. So there's not any fibers around. The matrix is fluid. It's a liquid environment, right? In the blood, that's called plasma. The liquid part of the blood is plasma. The cell types, you don't have fibroblasts anymore, right? But you have red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. So blood is there basically to carry nutrients around your body, and the white blood cells are there to defend your body. And then there are supporting connective tissues. There are some that provide a strong framework to support different tissues in the body or different parts of the body. Those include cartilage and bone. In cartilage, you don't have fibroblasts or fibrocytes, you have chondrocytes. So anytime you're talking about cartilage in A&P, this prefix CHOND gets thrown in there a lot. Chondrocytes, chondro implies that they're cartilage cells. Cartilage has kind of a gel-like matrix with some fibers in it, right? So it's not as dense as something like your tendon or your ligament, right? It provides a little more flexibility. It's a little more gel-like. The cartilage cells, the chondrocytes, they sit in small little, almost like caves, little hollowed out regions called lacunae. All cartilage is avascular, meaning it has no blood supply. That's really different than all the other connective tissues. All the other connective tissues have a lot of blood vessels. That's why if you damage cartilage, if you injure cartilage, it takes a long time to recover from that because you don't have a blood supply going to that area, right? So it takes a long time for the nutrients to get there. They have to diffuse through different tissue layers. It is covered by a perichondrium. You'll see this prefix peri a lot. Anybody know what the prefix peri means? Think of perimeter. That's what I always think of. It's the area around something, right? Peri always means surrounding. So the perimeter, right, is the surrounding area. Think of parentheses. Where do parentheses go? They go around something. So anytime in A&P you see peri, it always means surrounding. And I already told you CHOND has to do with cartilage. So all cartilage is surrounded by this outer fibrous layer, right? It's kind of just a membrane that's there. Here are the 3 types of cartilage. So within cartilage, there are 3 distinct types. They are hyaline, elastic, and fibro. Of those 3, hyaline is the one that provides the most movement, right? It's the most flexible. And so in hyaline cartilage, the chondrocytes are these dark purple circles, and they are sitting in little hollowed out areas called lacunae. And the matrix between them kind of looks like liquid, looks like a gel, right? And this is the kind of cartilage that you would find in between all of your long bones, so all of your joints. It's also the cartilage that makes up your nose. So it has a lot of flexibility to it. Elastic cartilage is a little more tough. It's a little more dense. You still have chondrocytes in lacuna, right? You still have cartilage cells and they're still sitting in their lacuna, but now you can see some of the fibers that are in that matrix, right? In hyaline cartilage, you can't really see any fibers. It just looks like a gel. Elastic cartilage is a little more firm, a little more dense. This would be like the cartilage that makes up your ear, right? And if you compare your ear to your nose, you can kind of feel that it's a little more dense. And then finally, fibrocartilage is the cartilage that's the most dense. Again, you still have chondrocytes. They're still sitting in lacunae, but now you can see a lot of, and it's hard to see, but you can probably see it at home on your, if you have this open at home, you can see the fibers. They're these light pink lines. They're hard to see on this screen right now, but you can see a lot more fibers in fibrocartilage than in the others, hence the name fibrocartilage. This is the cartilage that makes up the intervertebral discs, the discs in between the vertebrae and your back. So when you hear somebody says they slipped a disc or they herniated a disc, what they're talking about is they've injured this cartilage pad that sits between each of your vertebrae. Okay, and then finally we have bone. Bone really doesn't have much ground substance. The matrix is really this hard calcium compound. It's very strong, resists shattering. It is highly vascular. There's a lot of blood vessels in bone. It's actually, if you break a bone, it's easier for your body to repair that than if you tore cartilage. Sorry about that. So bone cells are not called fibrocytes. Bone cells are not called chondrocytes. Bone cells are called osteocytes, right? So you'll see this osteo a lot, has to do with bone. They also sit in lacunae. They sit in these little caves, right? And they are arranged in circular patterns. And we'll see why when we get to the bone. We'll talk about why they're arranged like this. But this is always what bone looks like. And in this picture, these black kind of ovals out here are the lacunae with the bone cells sitting in them, right? So they're pretty far apart. You can see there's a lot of material in between them. Okay, so with connective tissue, there's a lot of different types, right? There's connective tissue proper. There's 5 types. There's areolar, there's adipose, there's reticular, there's dense regular, dense irregular. Then there's also liquid, right? Liquid connective tissues, which would be blood and lymph. And then there are supportive ones. There's cartilage and bone, and there are 3 types of cartilage. So you really have to spend some time looking at these connective tissues. Now, the rest of this chapter is much easier. Muscle tissue, there's only 3 types of muscle, right? What can muscle do that the other tissues can't do you think? Kristen? Like you were going to say something.
I
Muscles
was
can,
thinking something, but I just went blank
ahead.
after.
muscles
I
can
could totally
contract.
forgot.
Yeah, they can contract. That's the only, that's the thing they can do. Epithelial tissue can't do that. The other tissues can't do that, right? So epithelial forms a lining or a barrier. Connective usually connects 2 things together. Muscle can contract. And that's its kind of special talent, right? It has this ability to contract. Now, all that means is that the muscle fibers can get shorter and longer, right? Which isn't really that big of a deal. But if you attach that muscle fiber to a bone and it gets shorter and it pulls the bone with it, then it produces movement, then that's a big deal. So when you're looking at muscle in terms of histology, in terms of tissue, there are 3 types of muscle tissue in the human body. There's skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. of those three types, skeletal is voluntary. It's the only one of the three that is voluntary, meaning that if you want to contract it, you can. So anything in your body that you can voluntarily move, finger, a toe, a leg, anything, is controlled by skeletal muscles. Okay, so it gets the name skeletal because they're almost all of them are attached to bones. That's what they do, right? They move a bone. The other two types, cardiac and smooth, are involuntary. You cannot cause cardiac muscle or smooth muscle to contract. Now, where from the name, where do you think cardiac muscle is?
Heart.
Chest.
In the heart, right?
Okay.
Cardiac muscle is the muscle that makes up the heart. You cannot cause your heart to contract. You can cause it to contract faster or slower. You can speed it up or slow it down. You cannot consciously cause your heart to contract. You can't do that. And then smooth muscle is also involuntary. Anybody have ideas of where smooth muscle is?
Somewhere like in the eyes.
The eyes? No, good thought. Good thought. Smooth muscle actually is in a lot of our organs, like our digestive organs, right? So the way that we move food through our intestines is through muscle contractions that keep squeezing and pushing the food along that tube. That's all involuntary, right? Smooth muscle is also found in our lungs, and it can contract our airways or open them up, dilate them. Smooth muscle is found in our blood vessels. It can do the same thing. It can constrict or dilate our blood vessels. So when you're looking at these, what do they look like, right? This is histology, so we really have to just know what they look like, not a lot about how they work yet. So here's skeletal muscle. It always is heavily striated. That means striped. So the muscle fibers are running horizontal, right? But then there are these vertical stripes, and they're really dark. And you see multiple nuclei, these purple things or dark pink over here are the nuclei. So the fibers themselves are horizontal. They're all parallel. They're all running straight. And they have these really dark striations, really dark stripes. And that has to do with the way actin and myosin are arranged in skeletal muscle. We'll talk about that later in a different chapter, right? But that's always what skeletal muscle looks like. If we get to cardiac muscle is also striated, right? These muscle fibers are running horizontal. It is striated, but not as dark, right? The striations are not as apparent as they are in skeletal muscle. Each cardiac muscle only has one nucleus, and cardiac muscles are branched. You can see it a little bit better in this redrawing. You can see, for example, this muscle fiber branches into two fibers, one up above and one below. Whereas skeletal muscles never branch. It's always just parallel, right? So you've got this branching that goes on. The other distinction that you have in cardiac muscle are these things called intercalated discs. Right? Oh, there we go. So every once in a while, you can see a vertical line that's a little bit darker, right? And you can see them over here on the slide. Intercalated discs are a way for one cardiac muscle fiber to communicate with the cardiac muscle fiber right next to it. Really important for cardiac muscle because where's cardiac muscle found?
The heart.
Your heart. You want all of your muscle cells that make up your heart to contract at the same time, right? So that your heart beats with some force to squeeze that blood to the body. So it's really important that cardiac muscle cells have this way of communicating with the cells right around them. And that's why they have these dark lines, right? Which are called intercalated discs. You can see a couple of them here. You can see one here, one here. And that's what they're there for. You won't see intercalated discs in skeletal muscle or in smooth muscle, only cardiac. So cardiac, it's lightly striated, it's branched, it has intercalated discs. Smooth muscle. There are no striations in smooth muscle. These fibers run horizontally. There's only one nucleus per fiber. You don't see any of those intercalated discs. You don't see any striations. Right. Then the fourth type of tissue. So we did connective, we did epithelial, we did connective, we did muscle. What can nervous tissue do that these others can't do?
Send electrical impulses.
Good.
that's-
Send electrical impulses. It's communication, right? It can send and receive signals. And so that's really important. That's what nerve cells do. They are specialized cells to communicate through electrical events. So you've got these tiny little electrical charges going all through your body, which is a really cool thing. We'll talk about that when we get to the nervous system. They do have a limited ability to repair after injury. It takes a long time to repair nerve cells that are damaged. Within neural cells, or within neural tissue, I should say, there are two types of cells. There are the neurons, right? Which those are the cells that make the electrical signals. They can send them out, they can receive them. And then there are all these supporting cells that surround the neurons, and those are called neuroglia. This ending, glia, comes from the same root word as glue. So that's how I think of them. They're the glue, right? They're holding these neurons together. And so a lot of them are providing physical support for the neural tissue. They're there just to kind of keep the tissue in the right place. They also, a lot of them supply nutrients to the neurons or defend the neurons from infection. So when you see a picture of nervous tissue, which I don't know why I don't have here, you'll see these big kind of star-shaped cells, right? And those are the neurons. The neurons have these extensions that go in all these different directions. And then you'll see a lot of little kind of ovals around them, these little dotted cells around them. Those are the glial cells, okay, the supporting cells. Now, I know we still have to go over the next chapter, which is the skin, but I'm going to stop there because I think epithelial and connective tissue is a lot to go through. So I'm going to stop there for now. I'll post this recording tonight. We'll pick up on Friday. We will cover the skin, which won't take long at all. I think skin usually takes about 15 minutes. And then we will go over the lab work for this week, which is really just a worksheet again for the tissues and the skin. I did get confirmation from Carolina Biological that they've sent out the lab kit to me, so I should have that soon. So we'll do that for the lab and realize that you have a quiz on this, on the tissues and the skin, that's due next Tuesday. Okay, Tuesday by midnight, so before Wednesday's class.
So what's due tonight then? I'm sorry.
So what's due tonight is the cell biology quiz, which actually
Okay.
should have been due last night, but I messed up the due date, so I gave you guys an extra day on it. On Friday, I will open up exam 2 for you. Exam 2 is on cell biology, the tissues, and the skin. And you'll have until the following Thursday at midnight. So you'll have almost a week to do it, just like you had the first test. And so that'll be opened up the same time that the test is due. That Thursday at midnight is going to be when your homeworks are due for these couple of chapters. I recommend doing the homeworks before you do the test because it's going to give you some practice on a lot of the questions that you have on the test, but technically they're not due until the same day. So that's kind of where we are, where we're going. Okay, and then starting next week, we'll actually get into the skeletal system, which I think a lot of people kind of look forward to that, to getting out of cell biology and tissues and getting into, bones and things that you can picture. So that'll be cool.
I just want to recommend this book to everybody. It's really useful for this class.
Oh yeah, good.
This goes in pretty good fundamental detail. So it'll really help you out. And then Ninja Nerds on YouTube. You're gonna love it. The guy draws everything and goes through and explains everything, diseases that are, it's ridiculous, but it's very helpful. And if you got the patience to go along with them, then it's really beneficial.
And there are a lot of good YouTube channels. I like Crash Course personally. I like that one. Crash
That's
Course goes
good.
into, it's like always just a 10-minute clip, which is good, right? A lot of times we don't have the attention span to sit there for an hour and watch something. So 10 minutes is a good length of time. The guy talks really fast and he's snarky. So you may like him and you may not like him. And if you don't, that's fine. Don't watch him.
The
But
organic
I think he
chemistry
goes over
lady
stuff.
on
What's that?
Crash Course. I saw the organic chemistry lady at Target in Hadley
Oh yeah, you
on
told me
Crash
that.
Course.
You
Did I
told me that.
really?
That's funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, no way. And she's like, I'm gone.
So the Crash Course in Biology is done by what's his name? John Green, the guy who wrote The Fault in Our
Tom Green.
Stars.
No, is it
No.
John? I don't know. Hank.
The guy who wrote The Fault in Our Stars and Paper Towns and some of
Yeah,
those
I
novels.
think that's Hank Green.
I think his brother is Hank that does some of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember his name, but yeah, he's cool.
So, I mean, there are great YouTube channels. I encourage you to look at them. Bozeman Biology is another good one. So I'll post on Moodle. Let me write that down. I'll post on Moodle that, some of the YouTube channels that some students have found helpful throughout the past couple of years. And if they help you, that's great. Use them. And if they don't, then don't worry about it. I'm just trying to give you as many different angles to hear these things from, right? Hearing it from somebody else, the way somebody else explains it may sit with you better than the way I explain it. So, it's always better to hear it from multiple points of view.
I find that Crash Course is good after you've read through the material and you need to do like a quick review and press fast forward through the whole, all of it. That's like, it really clicks that way. Anyways,
Right.
yeah.
Good point. Yeah, it does go fast, and he uses some detail in there, which is good for review, like you said.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Sorry, I'm
All right.
too much of a nerd. I don't mean to ruin your there's a word for that. I'm drawing a blank right now. I'm thinking about cyclotron. Yeah, I just got this book yesterday. I read the first chapter last night and picked it apart, and then I went through a video and kind of understood what I was reading, and it's like super interesting, especially when it's going to get into the applications in the medical field, like the PET scan,
wow.
the positive emission thing. Yeah,
Right.
it's super cool. So
Oh,
I'm really
wow.
excited about it.
Yeah, they're making huge advances in diagnostics, and imaging and stuff like that because of things like this, because of more findings with what they can do, which is great because you can certainly diagnose things quicker now than you could just even a few years ago.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
So we're gonna just go over the homework now on Friday, right?
Yeah, the lab stuff will go over on Friday. So Friday we'll do skin and we'll go over the lab stuff.
I was gonna just start like chipping away at it. I just didn't know if there were certain procedures we're not supposed to do or.
I don't think so.
Okay,
Not that I
okay.
remember, but
Yeah, there's like 4 pages and so that's why I was asked. I know some of
because
them.
what it's going to do is just force you to think
Yeah.
about those tissues that we talked about and categorize them again. Again, just putting things into groups or into buckets is sometimes easier than trying to just memorize all of them at once.
Yeah, I was just gonna putt around and start chipping away at some of it. And I mean, I print out multiple copies so I can practice a few times. So
Cool.
it's for
There
me
you
the
Sure
way
you
I
have your Tylenol.
competitive. Huh?
I said, make sure you have your Tylenol.
Oh,
Yeah, if you're studying right, you should get a pretty bad headache. My head hurts real bad. It's been hurting for like 2 weeks too. It won't go away.
well, I'm sure about midnight when the patients are sleeping, I can start working on it. So
Oh, there you go.
sleeping.
Yeah, do it at work.
That's all I do is my homework at work. I work just about 5 days a week. So someone's got to do it.
There you go.
Somebody's gotta do it. That's right.
So no, I just wanted to start working on it. Just
Oh, she's breaking up. She
Make sure I
froze.
can get it,
Froze up.
make sure.
Yeah. And like I said, I will tonight, I'll get in, I'll take some of those Bastion grades and put them in Moodle so that at least you'll have an idea of, you know, where your grades figure in based on your test scores and your quizzes and your homeworks, you know?
All right.
All right. Cool. I will see you guys on Friday.
All right. We'll see you
Alrighty.
then.
Everybody have